Take the most valuable company on earth today. Now imagine one worth nearly 10 times more. A company so enormous that, adjusted to today's money, it was worth more than Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, ExxonMobil, Berkshire Hathaway, Tencent, and Wells Fargo combined. By some estimates, around $7.9 trillion. No company before or since has ever come close. And here's the part that should stop you cold. It's gone. It didn't get outcompeted. It didn't get killed by a market crash. The richest company that has ever existed slowly, quietly poisoned itself from the inside. And by the last day of 1799, it was worth nothing. This is the story of the Dutch East India Company and how the greatest business machine ever built handed its investors a fortune for 200 years, then left them with a pile of debt and a lesson the world keeps forgetting. To understand how it died, you have to understand how absurdly powerful it became. So let's go back to the beginning. The year is 1602. The Dutch Republic is a tiny, waterlogged nation of barely 2 million people, and it wants a piece of the most lucrative trade on the planet: spices, pepper, nutmeg, cloves, worth more than gold by weight, because they came from the other side of the world, and getting them there meant a voyage so dangerous that only 1 in 3 sailors would ever come home. Dutch merchants were sending out ships in small competing groups, and the problem was obvious. They kept undercutting each other, prices swung wildly, and everyone bled money. So the Dutch government did something that had never really been done before. It forced the rivals to merge into a single company, and then it handed that company a set of powers so enormous it barely made sense. They called it the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the VOC. And it wasn't a company in any sense you'd recognize today. It had a legal monopoly on all Dutch trade with Asia. But that was the boring part. The charter also gave it the right to build its own forts, raise its own army, command its own navy, mint its own money, sign its own treaties with foreign kings, and wage its own wars. Read that again. A private business, answering to shareholders, could declare war on a country. It could execute people. It was less a company than a nation wearing a corporation's clothes. And then it did the thing that genuinely changed the world forever. To raise the money for all this, the VOC didn't borrow from a bank or a king. It sold pieces of itself, shares, to the general public. Anyone. A wealthy merchant, a shopkeeper, a maid with a little savings. For the first time in history, ordinary people could own a slice of a giant company and share in its profits. That was the world's first initial public offering. And to let people buy and sell those shares, the Dutch built the world's first stock exchange in Amsterdam. Stop and appreciate that. The stock market. The thing that today moves trillions of dollars and runs the global economy was invented to fund this one company. Almost every tool of modern finance you can name, from publicly traded shares to short selling to futures contracts, was born here in service of the VOC. And the machine worked. God, did it work. The VOC set up its Asian headquarters in a port it renamed Batavia, a city you might know better by its modern name, Jakarta. From there, it built a trading empire that stretched from South Africa to Japan. At its height, it had over 50,000 employees, a private army of 10,000 soldiers, more than 150 merchant ships, and 40 warships of its own. It was, for a time, the single largest commercial enterprise the world had ever seen, bigger than the trade of entire rival nations put together. And the money it threw off was staggering. For almost 200 years, the VOC paid its shareholders an average dividend of around 18% every year. In its best years, it paid 40%. Think about what that means. If you owned shares, the company handed you back nearly a fifth of your investment annually, decade after decade, generation after generation. Families grew wealthy, just holding VOC stock and doing nothing. Amsterdam became the richest city in the world. The elegant canals and townhouses tourists still photograph today. That was VOC money. By 1637, at its absolute peak, the company was valued at 78 million Dutch guilders, which sounds quaint until you adjust it. In today's money, that's the roughly $7.9 trillion figure. a sum so large it would today equal the combined economies of several major nations at once. It was the richest company the world had ever produced, by a distance no one has ever matched. But before we go any further, honesty demands we say the part the celebration leaves out. This fortune was not clean. The VOC built its wealth on conquest and cruelty. It seized territory by force, crushed local populations, and ran a brutal system of forced and enslaved labor, displacing tens of thousands of people. For its own sailors, life was a horror of disease, starvation, and death, which is why so many never returned. The trillions were real, so was the blood underneath them. Both things are true, and you can't tell this story properly by keeping only the shiny half. So here's a company with unlimited power, a money-printing monopoly, and 2 centuries of dominance. How on earth does something like that die? Slowly. That's the answer that matters. It didn't collapse in a dramatic crash. Its decline stretched across 70 years, so gradual that for a long time almost no one noticed the patient was dying. And the wound was self-inflicted. Here's the mechanism, and it's the whole point of this story. Remember those glorious dividends? The 18%, the 40%? That made everyone rich? By around 1730, the VOC had a terrible secret. It was no longer earning enough to pay them. Its actual trading profits were shrinking, but its shareholders had come to expect those fat payments. VOC stock had delivered them for over a century, and if the company suddenly slashed the dividend, the share price would crater and confidence in the whole of Amsterdam's markets could collapse. So the directors made a fateful choice. They kept paying the big dividends anyway, even though the profits weren't there to cover them. And where did the money come from? Not from earnings, from borrowing. The VOC started taking out short-term loans to pay its shareholders, distributing money it hadn't actually made. Sit with how insane that is. A company handing investors profits that are really just borrowed money to keep up the appearance of success. Modern analysts have a blunt name for that shape. It's the logic of a Ponzi scheme. You're not paying people out of what you earn. You're paying them out of new debt, and it only works as long as you can keep borrowing. The VOC was slowly hollowing itself out to protect a number on a page. And there was a second poison working alongside the first: corruption. On a scale that's almost hard to believe. VOC officials all over Asia realized the company's ships were the perfect vehicle for smuggling their own private goods. So they did, filling the holds with merchandise they'd profit from personally, while carrying only a little of the company's own cargo. They were getting rich by robbing the very business they ran. It got so bad that the joke among the Dutch was that VOC no longer stood for its official name. It stood for Vergaan onder corruptie, perished under corruption. And at the very end, the company essentially gave up fighting it. Its anti-corruption policy became, effectively, just taxing the bribes its own employees were taking. When a company starts collecting a fee on its own theft, the end is near. Debt on one side, corruption on the other. A company bleeding from both, while pretending on the surface that everything was fine. Then came the outside blows to finish it. In 1780, the Dutch stumbled into a war with Britain, the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, and it was a disaster for the VOC. The British Navy, now the strongest on earth, hunted VOC ships and choked its trade routes. The company's finances, already rotten from within, buckled. It limped on for a few more years, borrowing, restructuring, gasping. But the machine that had once been able to wage its own wars could no longer even protect its own cargo. In 1796, the Dutch government stepped in and effectively nationalized the dying company, taking it over to manage the wreckage. And on the 31st of December, 1799, the charter of the richest company in the history of the world was simply allowed to expire. No dramatic final battle, no single catastrophe. It just ended. Its debts and possessions were absorbed by the state. And its shareholders, the descendants of those people who had once grown wealthy on 18% a year, received nothing. The center of global finance drifted from Amsterdam to London, and it never came back. But here's the strange, lasting twist. The VOC died, but the machine it invented didn't. The stock exchange, the publicly traded company, the whole architecture of modern finance it pioneered to fund itself. All of that survived, and it runs the entire world economy today. The company that built the system was destroyed by the very forces the system still struggles with. The temptation to pay out money you haven't earned, and the rot that sets in when no one is truly watching the people in charge. Because that's the real lesson, and it's why this 200-year-old collapse still matters. The richest company that ever existed wasn't brought down by a stronger rival or a sudden crash. It was brought down by a slow choice, repeated year after year, to protect the appearance of prosperity instead of the reality of it. To keep paying shareholders a fortune it no longer earned, funded by debt, until the debt was all that was left. And if that pattern sounds familiar, companies borrowing to keep the payouts flowing, hiding the rot beneath a healthy-looking number, everyone comfortable right up until the moment they aren't. It should. Because the VOC didn't just invent the modern financial world. It also died of the exact disease that world still catches, again and again, right up to today. The biggest company in history had every advantage there is, and it still chose the lie that kills them all. Pretend you're richer than you are for just one more year, until there are no more years left.